So hopefully you can hear me.
We can indeed. So if I can first of all
can you enable screen sharing as well, Alistair?
Yep, that's done. Okay, can I welcome you all to this, the 2608th meeting of the Caledonian Philatelic Society, and introduce tonight's guest, Kim Stuckey, who is the chairman of the Falkland Islands Philatelic Study Group, a group which celebrated its 50th anniversary last year, and COVID put paid to efforts to celebrate that fact, other than a stamp issue from the Falkland Islands, 4 stamps which featured various activities of the study group itself. We are hoping that the study group will be able to have a celebratory weekend in September this year, which includes lunch on the SS Great Britain, which of course ended up as a hulk in Port Stanley and was brought back to Bristol for restoration from there. So very fitting that the study group should have lunch on board as part of its celebrations. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Kim, whose talk is entitled Wings Over Ice, and I'll leave it to him. Kim.
Great. And hopefully, Alistair, you can see the screen okay?
Yes, thank you.
Right, great. Okay, well, hello everyone. You may not have heard of this before. It's a little known expedition that lasted for 2 Antarctic summers between 1955 and 1957. And it was a mapping expedition that flew over the Antarctic Peninsula in a Catalina flying boat from a base at Deception Island. And it was called the Falkland Islands and Dependencies Aerial Survey Expedition, or in short, FIDASE. Just to give you some idea of where it was, the Antarctic Peninsula in the stamp, the Argentine stamp at the bottom there, the arc there is the peninsula. And Britain had generally ignored what was called the Falkland Islands Dependencies through the 1930s. But as World War II started, the military was very concerned about the Japanese, especially using the Falkland Islands, all the dependencies as a coaling and supply base from moving from the Pacific into the Atlantic. Even after the war, there was further concern about these undefended and uninhabited areas of land being subject to the territorial claims from both Argentina and Chile. And you can certainly see that from Argentina, and of course, eventually led to the 1982 war. Even besides Argentina and Chile, the US was also active in the Antarctic area, especially after the end of the war. And Britain really determined its sovereignty over the area. They set up a military operation called Operation Tabarin in 1944, which eventually became the Falkland Islands and Dependencies Survey. It established 3 new bases at Port Lockroy, Deception Island, and in the South Orkneys, and also linked to the existing British administrative base at South Georgia, at the top there of the Falkland Islands Dependencies stamp. Each of these bases opened a post office, and Falkland Island stamps were overprinted to be used at these post offices, and they were succeeded by these map stamps that you see here. Now, mapping the Antarctic Peninsula would also help support the claim of the sovereignty, and gave the contract to a company called Hunting Aero Surveys Limited to map the Antarctic Peninsula and also the Falkland Islands as well. In addition to the aerial survey, a helicopter would fly from the mountains and various other areas of the land. Now, Peter Mott, who's pictured right, led the expedition, And they set up a hut next to the base at Deception Island. And most of the first season consisted of trying to get the base established and get the amphibious aircraft, the Catalinas, out of the water. Now, you may have heard of the competing there's loads of photographs you've probably seen of snowcats over crevasses as they attempted to cross the Antarctic territory, led by Vivian Fuchs. And there was a lot more scientific focus and a huge PR. FIDASE expedition took place at the same time, but there was very little PR about it. So Mott was always annoyed that FIDASE was a poor relation of the two expeditions. And you can even see for the Trans-Antarctic expedition, they overprinted 4 issues, ironically then used by some of the people on the Hunting Aero Surveys expedition. Talking of the stamps, these are the stamps that were used at the base during the expedition, and they're absolutely beautiful set. The 1954 Falkland Islands Dependencies ships definitive set, and you can see the whole set there on the cover. It was based, as I said, at Deception Island, and that had a post office. The FIDS base had the post office, and you can see the Deception Island Chancellor there as well. And Deception Island's quite an unusual place in stamp. It's an old volcano, the caldera that's collapsed and let the sea in. And you can see just at the bottom of the landmass, there's 2 black areas there. And there, between them, there's a very small entrance that allows you to get into the harbour. That entrance is about 300 metres wide. So it gives you some idea that it's a fairly large island based on this old volcano. But that's where they were based, at this place, Deception Island. So as I said, the first season, which took place between December 55 and April 56, really was about establishing the base and the taxiing areas. They did start to do survey and photography. In terms of philatelic items, there's much less mail from this first season, but there was rather an attractive label, private label that was produced, that was put on some of the expedition mail. That's a picture of it there. In the second season, between December and April, December 56, April 57, they did the majority of the aerial photography. They had an interesting interruption in January 1957 that come on to, where His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh visited the base. And the majority of expedition mail and collector's mail is from that season. And you see this this cachet here that was used on the mail in the second season, either produced in black or magenta. And we'll see that as we go through the display. And actually, this is quite an interesting pictures here I took. I visited someone who actually had the cachet. They'd worked at Hunting Aero Surveys and rescued it. I think it might now be in the Scott Polar Museum at Cambridge. But there it is. There's the rubber cancel that was used for that cachet. And you can see it there. And I took some photos of the reverse of it as well. I talked about the aircraft, and here they are out of the water at Deception Island. And this is the bay that you come into as soon as you pass between the 2 points there. You come into the bay there. And they were Catalina Canso flying boats, which flew all the way down from Canada to the Antarctic. They could land, of course, on the bay, but they built a Dexian metal taxiway, which enabled them to get out of the water so they wouldn't suffer from corrosion. 2 aircraft and 2 flying teams were down there. And here's one of the pilots, Chris Gavin Robinson. He was there for two seasons. And this is a very colourful letter back to his son at school in England. He's pictured there in the middle of the photograph, doing a publicity photograph for Huntley and Palmer Biscuits, who gave some sponsorship to the expedition. And you can see the Canso aircraft behind him. Just from a philatelic point of view, some strange things happened during part of the expedition time at the FIDS base, that the base commander was also the postmaster. And he thought you had to add on the surface rate to the airmail rate to send a letter off. So often we see some letters that have tuppence halfpenny added, which is the surface rate, besides the airmail rate, which was 1 shilling for each 5 grams. So here, for example, there's 2 and tuppence halfpenny used to send a 10-gram airmail rate. But a very colourful cover from Chris Gavin Robinson. This is another cover, this time before that base commander arrived, so it's at the correct 10-gram airmail rate. And it's from the other pilot, Jim Greenshields, who was there for the first season, who's pictured there with Chris Gavin Robinson. I quite like this. The envelope, you can see crossed out there, is the Myrtle Beach Hotel, Kingston, Jamaica. Of course, they had the long flight down from Canada. Where he obviously took this envelope and used it when he was down in the Antarctic. But there again, you see the first season expedition label on the airmail. This is quite nice. This is from one of the co-pilots, David Banks, in the first season, and it's actually an airmail postcard. At that time in the Falkland Islands and Dependencies, there was no airmail postcard rate. So it was simply set at the first step, the 5-gram airmail rate. And again, halfpenny was added by mistake by the base postmaster. And this was sent towards the end of the first season with the airmail, with the cachet on it. You can see it's actually signed by Dave, withdrawing shortly, so it's approaching the end of the season. And there's one of the aircrew briefings where he's pictured there. Now, I talked about the expedition ship, which was the Olaf Sven, which was a charter ship from Denmark. And that's the captain, Jan Rigger. And this is a cover that he sent to his wife in the first season. And that's got a little cachet, if you look at the bottom left, MS Olaf Sven in violet. It was its first trip to Antarctic waters. And it had a very clever hatch and lift put in the front of the ship for lifting the helicopter out of the hold and then using it as a flight deck for the helicopter. As you can see, it's quite a small ship, so it's quite incredible pilot skills to land the helicopter on the ship. They had some fun traveling down. They took all the avgas for the helicopters and for the Cansos. So you saw that one of the messages sent out to people was not to wear hobnail boots on deck, because they were a bit what came up from hobnail boots. That's the ship, the Olaf Sven. And this is the first season helicopter. It was a Sikorsky S-51. There used to be a heliport at the South Bank in London, and it had operated out of that South Bank heliport. And it also had been provided advertising, because of course helicopters were fairly new in those days. There is in Germany, but that was the helicopter used in the first season. It's pictured there at Austral Island, doing some surveying there. Quite interesting operating that in Antarctic conditions as well. And you can, I'll talk about that later on. Visibility out of that Sikorsky wasn't great. And in the second season, they switched to using a Bell 47D. And you can see it's got a much better visibility with the Perspex bubble. And it's also got flotation landing gear. So if it had to go down on water, it could land there. I said it had better visibility than first season, but again, they did suffer with the perils of Antarctica in that they suffered a whiteout when they were flying over Tower Island and the helicopter crashed. And you can see the wreckage of it. It's a pretty major crash, but the pilot and his passengers survived. But it was the only helicopter they had in the second season. So they had to sail all the way to Montevideo to pick up the replacement helicopter and spares. So that took a big time out of surveying the trig points. But nice picture of it flying in. I think it's landing there on HMS Protector, which was the Navy ship that was down in the Antarctic waters at that time. I say Bim Jakes, Greville Jakes, was the helicopter pilot, and here's a letter back to his wife in the UK in end of 1955, the expedition label on it, and it's at the 6 shilling airmail rate for 30 grams, so quite a bit of writing in that letter. As he said at the time, HMS Protector arrived, all hands took the afternoon off to write home as the ship will take mail. And that's a photo of Bim Jakes there. And I talked about the cover, deck and lift on the Olaf Sven, and there's a picture of the Bell helicopter coming out of the hold there. And this is a cover to his parents from the helicopter engineer Brian Davey, 10-gram airmail rate plus the tuppence halfpenny added. And that's got the second season cachet. But you might notice the cachet's a small one. It's not the large one. Now, there was the larger cachet was definitely used on most of the philatelic mail and also even most of the expedition mail. This small one is pretty scarce and not seen very often on mail at all. But here's an example of it being used. We'll see a few covers from a surveyor called Colin Brown. And besides the cachet that I showed you the picture of, the photographs of earlier, this person also had Colin Brown's diary, and he wrote that on a sort of duplicating pad, and he tore out the duplicates and sent them off to his parents as diary sheets. And you can see he's also excellent artist, and there's some of his drawings there from his diary. That's the picture there, bottom left, of Colin Brown taken. He was there both seasons. And here's some of the mail of these diary sheets being posted off home, and one at 5-gram rate, one at 10-gram rate, both bearing the first season label. And moving up, the 15-gram rate and 20-gram rate. So he obviously varied the number of diary sheets that he sent home, dependent on how much writing he'd been doing at any particular time. Of course, the other thing was that mail piled up waiting for a ship to arrive to take the mail back, so which would be something like HMS Protector or something like RRS Shackleton that went down to do supplies around bases. So these two envelopes here have an identical cancel date of the 16th of December 1955, but would have been written at separate times, but were just held ready to be cancelled when the ship arrived. And this was indeed the first mail out that went out after the expedition arrived. And here's another one that was sent seconds. Another cachet here, which says in violet, mail from Hunting Aero Surveys Base, Deception Island, South Shetlands. That was supplied to the expedition by Harry Evans of the Polar Postal Society of Great Britain. And this is one sent at the 6 shillings airmail rate. You can see it's got the 5 shilling ship stamp on it, which is a tough item to find on the commercial cover. So it's scarce use of that 5 shilling rate. and the envelope indicated, I think his parents would have written this, that the mail was received on the 17th of March 1957. It was posted, or cancelled rather, at the end of January. So that's not too bad to get back all the way from Deception Island up to the UK. Would have been carried by ship to Port Stanley, and then it would have gone onwards by ship from Port Stanley to Montevideo, because until 1972, the Falkland Islands didn't have an airstrip. So it was carried by ship to Montevideo and would have then either gone on a flight from Monte or over to Buenos Aires and carried from Buenos Aires up to the UK. There's a mass of photographs taken, negatives on board the Cansos, and those reels of film were, they had photographic processing at Deception Island. And one Arthur Arkinstall here sent this one to someone, I think, who was at Hunting Aero Surveys. They were based near in Hertfordshire, so I suspect this was someone in Huntings this was sent back to, but this was sent, as I say, from Arthur Arkinstall. There's also some mail back to Frank Wills, who was the chief executive of Hunting Aero Surveys. He had formed the first aerial survey and photography company all the way back in 1919, after the First World War. It was called Aero Films, and it was acquired by Hunting Aviation in 1942 and renamed Hunting Aero Surveys. This cover was sent by Peter Mott just after the helicopter crash that I mentioned on Tower Island. And at the time, he was probably even considering if the expedition could continue. And that may well have been the subject of this personal letter to Frank Wills. And you can see the larger expedition cachet that's on it there. There's a photograph there of Frank Wills at the top left. Another one back to head office, and this time it's to the photographic manager there. There they are, based in Boreham Wood in Hertfordshire, and again sent at the 4 shilling 20 gram ml rate with the tuppence halfpenny added, using the Trans-Antarctic Expedition overprint there and the second season cachet there. And again, you can see one of the Canadian hunting envelopes used in that case. Again, probably brought down from Canada on the Cansos and then used down at Deception Island. Now, here's some interesting mail that forms part of the expedition as well, which is mail on the way down. And this is from the expedition agent for Hunting Aero Surveys, called McLean and Stapleton, based in Montevideo. The Olesen would arrive in Montevideo and then obviously pick up the majority of the stores that were needed to carry on down that hadn't been brought from the UK. And this was sent, again, probably by one of the Canso crew back up to Canada, and received both the McLean and Stapleton cachet and then a Montevideo cancel and meter mark applied by McLean and Stapleton. Unusual mail as part of the expedition. And another example as well, on the voyage south, 1956, when it took on the supplies, Brian Davey, that we'd already seen a letter from Deception Island, this is something back to his parents there from Monte, and that's got the Uruguayan stamps on, but also the Hunting Aero Surveys cachet, which ties it more easily to the expedition. And of course, they called in at Port Stanley on the way down as well, their final stop before getting to Deception Island. And here's an example of Bim Jakes sending a letter back to his wife with the Falkland Islands set, QE2 interim set, it was called. It was a reprint of the 1952 set with the Queen's Head. And there is him sending that back from the Falkland Islands in November 1956 before they set sail down to Deception. And the Cansos were also at Deception as well, at Port Stanley as well. And here you can see one of the Cansos tied up at the jetty, and you can see Christchurch Cathedral, the cathedral in Port Stanley in the background. And they called at the start and end of each season, obviously to get fuel and any maintenance required. Certainly at the end of the first season, one of the Cansos needed some pretty major repairs done to one of the engines. But on the way down for the second season, they took the opportunity to do mapping of the Falkland Islands as well. And then the Directorate of Colonial Survey sent some people down to do the survey part of the mapping as well. And the story is that they had all the photographs that were taken by the Cansos of the Falkland Islands laid out on the dance floor of the town hall in Stanley to put them together and check they'd mapped all the areas of the islands. And those maps lasted all the way through, and they were vital during the Falklands War in 1982. Those detailed maps that were provided by the aerial photography of the FIDASE expedition on the way down. So at the end of the first season, here's an example of a postcard sent back at the foreign printed matter rate. And I talked about the QE2 interim set, which was used the reprint of the 1952 Georgia 6 set. Well, they didn't do that for the tuppenny value, so they were still using the tuppenny Georgia 6 stamp at that time. And there it is, cancelled by Port Stanley postmark in March 1956. I suspect that this was carried by the Canso to Montevideo and put in the post there. There's no proof of that, but the Cansos definitely, when they flew from Stanley to Montevideo, took mail with them as well. So the islanders always took every opportunity for any mail going out for it to go by any means possible. So I suspect it could have well been carried by the Canso anyway. And here's some project mail to the project manager at Hunting Aero Surveys. This doesn't bear any cachets, but it shows that sometimes even commercial mail didn't receive that. It's an interesting example. Sent at the 3 shilling rate with our rogue tuppence halfpenny added again. Now, this is my favourite cover, the whole collection I've got. It is actually A4 size, so I'm only showing the top of it. There were second season cachets and the Olaf Swen cachet on it as well. But it's another item that's sent out to the project manager at Hunting Aero Surveys back at base. And it's an incredible calculation. You can see 12 and 5p written there. Because as I said, the airmail rate was a shilling per 5 grams, yet the surface rate was tuppence halfpenny per ounce. So we have an interesting combination of gram rates for airmail and ounce rates for the surface part of it that was mistakenly added. And it went over 1 ounce surface rate, so it went up to 2 ounces. So they had to have 5p added for the surface mail part. But then it was at the 60 gram airmail rate for 12 shillings. And again, a beautiful stamp, the 10 shilling Falkland Island Dependencies set. And you don't often see that on commercial cover. And again, scarce use of this higher value on what was definitely a commercial cover back to the project manager at Hunting's. Now, I talked about the Duke of Edinburgh. And he visited the base on the 3rd of January 1957. He was on board Britannia, and he was doing a round the world tour in 1956 and 57 after he'd opened the Olympic Games in Melbourne in Australia in 1956. He'd already visited the other bases on the Antarctic Peninsula, and then after Deception Island, he headed for the Falklands, as it's one of the most furthest north bases there. After he'd visited the Falklands, he then was heading home, but he did go back via South Georgia, and then he went to Tristan da Cunha, and then he went to St. Helena on the way back up on board Britannia. Amazing to think Britannia's down there in that base, sailing through Neptune's Bellows, as it was called. Had HMS Protector as well as a guard ship. And Prince Philip is seen there. He's walking with Peter Mott and the base leader as well. He had lunch at the FIDS base with the FIDS team. And then the expedition members and the FIDS team all went on board Britannia in the evening and had a few drinks, as you can imagine, and watched Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. And this is a cover that was sent to Harry Evans on the 3rd of January 1957, using the smaller cachet, as you can see, that scarcer one, sent on the day of the Duke's visit. So when he was up in the Falkland Islands, by the way, again, he obviously had a lot of official things, but he also visited Stanley Racecourse. So besides a golf course, there's a race course there, and he actually entered one of the races and won, riding without any hat or anything like that, but had quite a good time at Stanley as well. And finally, we look at the expedition philatelic recognition at last, and it took quite a while, as you can see, but there were 4 stamps issued by what had become the British Antarctic Territory by that time, and an attractive set of 4 stamps. The one I showed earlier with the map of Deception Island, that's Hunting Lodge, which was the hut they built, constructed prefabricated hut next to the FIDS base. The photograph you saw earlier of the Bell helicopter landing on board HMS Protector, and a rather nice photo there of the Canso flying boat that flew over the Antarctic Peninsula, miles away from any other base other than the Deception Island base. So things like weather were very important, obviously, that they could land back at Deception. Very brave guys, both in terms of the helicopters and the aircraft flying down in the Antarctic. And with that, we come to the end of Wings Over Ice. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Kim. That was everything I was hoping you would be able to do. So I'll open up to questions if anybody has any. I
don't know about anybody else. I'd never heard of that expedition, and that was absolutely fascinating, Kim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. Was the connection all right, by the way?
Some of the sound was slightly raw, but I don't know whether that was me or you. But,
I think it's me. I'm waiting.
That was perfect.
Waiting for fibre to arrive here, I'm afraid. So yeah.
Every time you change the slide, there's a slight buzz on your voice.
Yeah,
I think you're just loading the internet a little bit more.
Yeah. Apologies for that.
Not needed. It was fine.
Needed. I got there. My computer kept telling my connection was unstable, and I wasn't really sure whether it was me or yourself. But there we are. Maureen, you're muted. If you wanted to come in. Maureen, you're muted. You need to unmute.
Kim, sorry, I have now.
Yeah.
I'm a black coffee.
Kim, can I ask you about this action of the base postmaster and these tuppence halfpenny stamps?
Yeah.
Did that carry on right through the whole process?
No, it was one base leader called Percy Guyver. He misread the instructions, because when they arrived, these weren't postmasters, they were someone on the base, and it was often the base leader. So they'd receive a briefing and a sheaf of papers, plus some stamps, etc. And unfortunately, I haven't seen it anywhere else ever, but it was this one year that he was there. There was this misinterpretation of the sheet, and he obviously thought, well, because it's going by ship, I have to add this tuppence halfpenny on. So that's what happened. But at none of the other bases have I ever seen that happen.
I just wondered if they were
collected
trying
the
to get
money?
some kind of skin.
Yeah.
They certainly must have got through a fair number of 2.5p stamps.
Yeah. Yeah. Luckily, I suspect he had a lot of those, because that was the Commonwealth surface rate. So that was probably the largest one, largest volume of stamps that he had.
It was also nice to see that he had the high values with them as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting the number of high values that were issued. Not very many, as you can imagine. Typically one sheet of each. And I've actually got some, they were sheet numbered actually. You know that typically what happened when sheets were produced for the colonies, some went to the Crown agents directly in London for dealers, etc. They weren't numbered. Ones that went down to a colony would be numbered. So it's always quite nice to have a sheet number block of something, because you know it's been to the colony. And that was certainly true of the Falkland Islands ones. But sometimes they specially numbered the ones that went down to the Antarctic bases. So instead of being like 4 digits, you'd have something like 2 digits, like 01, which is sheet number. So they're very difficult to find, but they're well worth finding. Nice. I've always liked collecting sheet number blocks, because you know they actually went to the colony. I think that applied to a lot of the colonies as well. Crown agents ones were typically not sheet numbered, because it was an additional cost.
Graham, yeah.
Yep. Can I ask the inevitable question? Did the postmaster at Deception have the error of his ways pointed out to him, and did he ever correct the situation?
He never corrected the situation while he was there. It was slightly out of sync, the expedition time and the base postmaster time. So towards the end of the second season, he'd been replaced. The base commander had been replaced, and the person who came in just charged them the airmail rate. Similarly, at the start, when they first arrived, it was right. It was that sort of middle period where the tuppence halfpenny was added. So that's why you get them at the start when they arrived, and at the end, just before they left, you've got the correct airmail rates on them, because he'd left. It was never corrected while he was there.
And another question, if I may, did you say that the expedition also used Lockroy and South Georgia? Did any expedition mail go through those post offices? No,
they didn't use Port Lockroy and South Georgia. No, sorry if I gave that impression. They used one more base in the South Shetlands they visited, which name has gone completely out of my head now. Admiralty Bay. And there is some expedition mail from Admiralty Bay, but that's pretty scarce.
On that basis, have you got any idea how many letters came or were circulated?
Yeah, commercial mail is pretty scarce. I would think it's really difficult, because obviously some of it may be coming out into the market because it's in family collections still. But what we've seen on the market is probably less than 100 commercial items. There was a fair amount of philatelic mail, but not masses of it. obviously someone like Harry Evans at the Polar Postal Society knew of it. There was a collector called Roberts as well, Southport, I think he was at, received some mail, and a few others. But even philatelic mail is quite difficult to find. But so, you know, we're talking even with philatelic, we're probably talking 200 to 300 items in total.
It's like I've never heard of it. It's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah, as I say, it's a very poor probably everyone's heard of.
I heard of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Brian, our polar man, doesn't have any questions, no?
Oh, it's one thing I've never seen this material before. Really, you've collected a superb amount of material for that expedition. I never even realised that there was such an expedition actually happening, because the Trans-Antarctic was the main one that everybody knew about.
Yeah.
Even as a kid, I remember reading about that, and they actually publicised it very well at the time.
Yeah. I was very lucky. I was very lucky that I collected from one lot a sort of kickstart to it. I think with all these things, you need some luck at the start to get a number of items, and you can then build on it from there.
You've done that very successfully by the looks of it. Well done. Fascinating.
Well, there's certainly not much hunting surveys material comes up for auction, I've seen anyway.
No. There was a book, by the way, produced by Peter Mock called Wings Over Ice, and that's why that's the name of the presentation. There it is, by Peter Mott, which is quite useful because he's got a list of things like the crew of both the ship and the base and all the pilots and that in there, which is ideal thing that you need for writing up, you know, what each person is.
All the background.
But I don't know if you find this sometimes when you get write-ups of expeditions or various things, it's very difficult to find actual dates within the book. They sort of write it and say, we then went there, but it never says what date they went on. So you have to try and decipher where people were at any one time.
Get a date line.
They don't think of collectors when they write these books.
Well, probably the editor tells them it's really boring if you keep putting dates into things.
Yeah.
You don't all need to know exactly. You know.
So it says, you know, the Olaf Sven arrived. You think, okay, what date did it arrive?
Nice date line would be very useful here, folks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Any other questions? Nobody's got anything burning, having heard about something they've never heard about before? No. In that case, I'll pass over to Ian.
Thank you. Kim, you've managed to do what happens quite often. I mean, that doesn't take away from you. You've presented us with something where, from a position of start, you've built a whole story around something that happens over 2 years, focused, complete, covering an enormous amount of ground, and yet the whole thing is a nice package of story. And once again, for me, it shows the sort of thing that you can do with our interest, when you pick a subject matter that goes beyond just the philatelic side of it. I mentioned the business about the base postmaster and how he perhaps made a bit of a skin off that, but one thing that you did mention, which I thought was pretty good, was the fact that they actually managed to transmit mail because of various stages in the process, without necessarily using South Shetland stamps, without using Falkland Islands dependency stamps. And it shows that you've potential there to build a whole story around just how things manage to happen. And it comes across absolutely marvelously. You know, the basic principle of going from South Shetlands to Falkland, Falkland to Montevideo, and then back to the UK or Canada or North America, wherever. It really is quite a well put together presentation, and I think we all really benefited a lot from it. Certainly it was totally new to me, as it was to quite a lot of people by the sound of things, and I think we're all very pleased. Can I ask everyone please to unmute themselves, because a round of applause in mute is a pretty ineffectual thing. But if you unmute yourselves, and we'll give Kim a big thank you and a round of applause, please, tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Kim. I shall hopefully see you in September.
Yeah.
And on Zoom before then. In the meantime, can I just remind you all, we meet again in 2 weeks' time, when Andy is going to take us to slightly warmer climes than we've had tonight, with a display of Fiji, which I think is north of the Antarctic somewhat. We'll look forward to that, Andy. 2 weeks tonight. You'll get the usual reminder from me, hopefully on the Monday or so.
Is he going to dress appropriately?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh,
Do you think George should dress appropriately instead of just putting a background of a beach?
don't want any grass skirts. honestly.
Anyway, thank you all for coming tonight. Stay safe, and see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Bye all.
Good night,
Thank you.
all.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks all.